Remembrance Day 2021, Ishida Castle, the Goto Islands, Nagasaki, Japan. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are again at Ishida Castle in Goto City in the Goto Islands, Nagasaki Prefecture, Japan, to observe Remembrance Day for Japan. Today we are joined by Anna Christian from Texas, Carolina Marini from Argentina, and Masako Hirata of Goto City. This castle was the last castle to be built in Japan. It was begun in 1849 and, due to construction difficulties, was not completed until 1853. It held a battery of coastal artillery when completed, and its usefulness was brief. And after the Meiji Restoration, it was abandoned in 1872. Since then, it has become a government office. Then, over the years, became changed to its current form. It now houses the Goto City Library, Nagasaki Prefectural Goto High School, Goto City Fukue Cultural Center, and behind me, the Goto Tourism History Museum. The museum has 3 floors of exhibits, with a cultural movie theater on the first floor. There are exhibits about the ruling Goshima clan, artifacts of the Tokugawa period and Meiji Restoration, as well as Jomon period exhibits on the second floor. On the third floor, there are cultural and festival displays, as well as displays about fishing and whale hunting. There is also a large display area with a video about the hidden Christians of the Goto Islands. Why are we here? Great Britain and Japan entered into an alliance from 1902 to 1923. It was entered through mutual interests and served Japan particularly well in their war with Russia in 1903. Preventing the French from assisting the Russians, as that would mean war between Britain and France. As Japan gained more power in Asia, at this time particularly over Korea, America did not approve of the arrangement, and Australia didn't feel comfortable with it either. Canada would also not approve of it in 1919, following the First World War, due to Japanese expansion interests. The 553 Treaty, part of the Washington Treaty on Naval Limitations, allowed Japan parity with the great naval powers, Britain and America, as they had to spread their fleets over many oceans. The alliance was ended in 1923 due to conflicting alliance pressures and mutual distrust. In the First World War, however, the alliance was solid and enabled for the Allies to take the German port of Tsingtao, as well as defeat the German East Asia Squadron. The siege of Tsingtao was the attack on the German port of Qingdao, known then as Tsingtao, in China during World War I, by Japan and the United Kingdom, with some British Empire also involved. The siege took place between October 31st and November 7th, 1914, against Imperial Germany. The siege was the first encounter between Japanese and German forces, and also the first Anglo-Japanese operation of the war. Throughout the late 19th century, Imperial Germany joined other European powers in an imperialist scramble for colonial possessions. As with other world powers, Germany began to interfere in Chinese local affairs. After 2 German missionaries were killed in the Juyi incident in 1897, China was forced to agree to the Claochao Bay concession in Shantung, which is now called Shandong. This gave Germany a 99-year lease on the Bay area. Germany then began to assert its influence across the rest of the province and built the city and port of Tsingtao. This became the base of the German East Asiatic Squadron of the Kaiserliche Marine, meaning the German Navy. They operated to support the German colonies in the Pacific. Britain viewed the German presence in China as a threat and leased Weihai Wei, also in Shantung, as a naval port and coaling station. Russia leased its own station at Port Arthur, now called Lushengkou. France leased Kwangchu Wang. Britain also began to forge better ties with Japan, whose developments in the late 19th century mirrored that of the European imperialist powers, as Japan took control of Korea and Taiwan in the First Sino-Japanese War. Japanese and British diplomatic relations became closer, and an Anglo-Japanese alliance was signed on January 30th, 1902. Japan saw the alliance as a necessary deterrent to its main rival, Russia. Japan demonstrated its potential by its victory in the 1904-1905 Russo-Japanese War. The alliance continued into World War I and was in effect until 1923. When the war in Europe began in August 1914, Britain promptly requested Japanese assistance. On August 15th, Japan issued an ultimatum stating that Germany must withdraw her warships from Chinese and Japanese waters and transfer control of its port of Tsingtao to Japan. The next day, Major General Mitsuomi Kamio, General Officer commanding 18th Infantry Division, was ordered to prepare to take Tsingtao by force. The ultimatum expired on August 23rd, and Japan declared war on Germany.
At the beginning of hostilities, the ships of the German East Asia Squadron under Vice Admiral Maximilian von Spee were dispersed at various Pacific colonies on routine missions. Spee's ships met in the northern Mariana Islands at Saipan for coaling. SMS Emden then headed for the Indian Ocean, while the rest of the squadron made their way to the west coast of South America. The squadron fought with and destroyed a Royal Navy squadron at the Battle of Cornell on November 1st, before being destroyed at the Battle of Falkland Islands in the South Pacific on December 8, 1914.
On August 29th and 30th, 1914, New Zealand took German Samoa. Then Australian troops in September 1914 fought the short battle of Pitapaka against German and native policemen, won the battle, and the Germans retreated to Toma. Australians and a British warship besieged the Germans and their native allies, and the Germans surrendered. By 1915, the only German forces that managed to hold out were a small expedition under the command of Hermann Ditzner. They managed to elude Australian patrols until the end of the war. He became quite famous at the time for that.
The United States was involved in one hostile encounter with the Germans in the Pacific during World War I. On April 7, 1917, the SMS Comorin was scuttled in Apra Harbor, Guam, to prevent her capture by the auxiliary cruiser USS Supply. The Americans fired their first shots of World War I at the Germans as they attempted to sink their ship themselves. In the end, the Germans succeeded in scuttling the Cormian with a loss of 9 men.
Back to Tsingtao. Germany controlled the port and peninsula in the area. It had built up its defenses into 3 defense lines. First, in the hills, then closer, then at the town itself. There were trenches, batteries of artillery, and concrete bunkers in those lines. The harbor was defended by batteries and mines were laid in the water. with only the Germans, of course, having the maps to where the mines were.
On August 27th, the Imperial Japanese Navy sent ships under Vice Admiral Sadikichi Kato in his flagship, the Pre-Dreadnought Suwa, blockade the coast near Tsingtao. The British Royal Navy also sent the Pre-Dreadnought HMS Triumph and the destroyer HMS Usk to join in the blockade. The Triumph was damaged by the German shore batteries. The blockade consisted mainly of old, obsolete ships. The seaplane carrier Wakamiya also joined the blockade. Its aircraft would become the first of its kind in the world to attack land and sea targets. They would also take part in another first, a nighttime bombing raid.
The 18th Infantry Division was the primary Japanese army formation that took part in the initial landings, with 23,000 men and 142 artillery pieces. They began to land on September 2nd at Lungkao, at Laoshan Bay, on September 18th. This was Chinese territory, and China protested this violation of neutrality, but did not interfere with the operations. The British government and others were concerned about Japanese intentions in the region and decided to send a small, symbolic British contingent from Tientsin to calm people down. The 1,500-man contingent was commanded by Brigadier General Nathaniel Walter Barnardston and consisted of 1,000 soldiers of the 2nd Battalion, the South Wales Borderers, later followed by 500 soldiers of the 36th Sikhs. Other Empire troops also joined in very small numbers. The Germans responded to the threat by concentrating all their troops in the city. Kaiser Wilhelm II made the defense of Tsingtao a top priority, saying that it would shame me more to surrender Tsingtao to the Japanese than Berlin to the Russians. The German garrison, commanded by Naval Captain Alfred Mayer Waldeck, consisted of the Marines of 3rd Sea Battalion, Navy sailors, Chinese colonial troops, and Austro-Hungarian sailors. The total was only 3,625 men. We also had a few Navy ships.
There was the torpedo boats S-90, 4 small gunboats, and the Austro-Hungarian protected cruiser, Kaiserin Elizabeth. This ship's crew was divided in half, with one half of the crew joining in the land defenses. On August 22nd, the HMS Kennett was damaged by the German torpedo boat SMS S-90, the German gunboat SMS Lotting, and a 4-inch shore battery off Tsingtao. The little S-90 hit it twice.
As the Japanese approached their positions, the Germans withdrew to the inner defense line. Then the German gunboat SMS Jaguar sank the Japanese destroyer Shirotaye. On September 5th, a Japanese aircraft reported that the German East Asia Squadron was gone. The Japanese then ordered 3 of their heaviest ships to leave the blockade. The next day, the first air-sea battle in history took place when a fireman seaplane from Wakamiya tried unsuccessfully to attack the Kaiserin Elizabeth and the SMS Jaguar with bombs.
The Austrian cruiser's biggest guns were then removed from the ship and made into a shore battery. On September 13th, the Japanese tried a cavalry raid on the German rearguard at Sino. The Germans retreated. The Japanese then took control of the railways leading to the port. The weather was getting bad, so the Japanese left that area and landed again at Laoshan Bay.
Then it became an artillery duel. 3 of the 4 gunboats were scuttled. The S-90 slipped out of the harbor and sank the Japanese cruiser Takichiho on October 17. The S-90 was unable to escape Tsingtao, ran out of coal, and was scuttled by her crew.
SMS Tiger was scuttled on October 29th and Caesarian Elizabeth on November 2nd. The last ship, SMS Jaguar, was scuttled on November 7th after the surrender.
The Japanese started shelling the port and fortress on October 31st. Just like with the siege of Port Arthur and the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War, trenches were dug closer and closer to the fortifications, while big guns were brought from Japan to fire at the positions. The firing went on day and night. Then, by November 6th, the Germans ran out of ammunition.
The Germans only had one aircraft, a Taube, flown by Lieutenant Gunther. He made a few nuisance attacks on the blockade squadron. Plushtow claimed the downing of a Japanese fireman MF-7 with his pistol, which was the first airplane-to-airplane victory in aviation history. He flew out of Tsingtao on November 6th, carrying the governor's last dispatches, which were forwarded to Berlin through diplomatic channels. He made his way around the world, avoiding capture until 1915, then escaped the POW camp and made it to the neutral Netherlands. He continued flying to Germany, then after the war became an explorer. He died in a plane crash in Patagonia, Argentina in 1931.
Colonel Heiji Sato of Nagasaki led the Japanese attack on the night of November 6th and overwhelmed the defenders. His monument is at Omura Castle, Nagasaki Prefecture. The Germans were able to hold out for nearly 2 months, despite a total Anglo-Japanese blockade and being outnumbered 6-1. The defeat was still a morale booster for the Allies in Europe.
The German defenders watched the Japanese as they marched into Tsingtao, but turned their backs on the British when they entered the town. German prisoners of war in Japan were held until 1920. They formed a brass orchestra that was quite famous then. 170 of them decided to remain in Japan, while the others were sent back. The Naruto Camp Orchestra from the band of the 3rd Sea Battalion gave Beethoven and Bach concerts throughout Japan wearing their uniforms.
Japanese naval ships also served in the Mediterranean Sea, and 77 Japanese sailors are buried in Malta. As the British Empire, including Canada, were allies with Japan in this war, which was part of the Manchuria War for Japan, this is the only appropriate location for this ceremony in this area. This marks the 106th anniversary of the fall of Tsingtao. It also marks the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Pacific War, better known as World War II in the Pacific Theater. As for the Remembrance Day ceremonies, Remembrance Day was first observed in 1919 throughout the British Commonwealth. It was originally called Armistice Day to commemorate the armistice agreement that ended the First World War on Monday, November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. From 1921 to 1930, Armistice Day was held on the Monday of the week in which November 11 fell. In 1931, this was changed so that the ceremony was only held on November 11th. This was also the year that the name changed to Remembrance Day. Every year on November 11th, British, Canadians, Australians, and New Zealanders, among other Commonwealth countries, pause for a moment of silence to honor and remember the men and women who have served and continue to serve their countries during times of war, conflict, and peace. Other nations that are not Commonwealth members also observe Remembrance Day. These include France, Belgium, and Poland.
The United States used to commemorate Remembrance Day on November 11th, but that changed in 1951 to Veterans Day in May.
The ceremony is usually observed through the marching groups forming up and moving to the local cenotaph. The veterans of the area would lead, then the local serving military, then police, then cadets. They are usually led by a bagpipe or brass marching band and a color guard, carrying the flags of their country, province, and legion. They may even include the colors of the local reserve regiments. The ceremony includes a church service and a speech in memory of the fallen. The cenotaph is guarded by a few chosen soldiers who, while armed, have no ammunition. A moment of silence is observed for about a minute, then taps is played, either on a trumpet or a bagpipe. The ceremony is then concluded by the laying of wreaths by different groups and families in memory of the fallen. The parade is then marched back to the local Legion Hall for warm soup and coffee. Millions have served and died in battlefields all over the world in service to their countries, God, king or queen, and the Commonwealth or empire at the time. It is very important to remember their sacrifices and teach the younger generations about why they served. Today, it has become even more important as educational systems seem to be failing in teaching history, for veterans to pass on the stories of those who have gone before us. We must remember our heritage. The poppy is the symbol of Remembrance Day. Replica poppies are usually given for voluntary donation by the British Legion, Royal Canadian Legion, or the Australian and New Zealand Legions. The proceeds go to assist the surviving veterans of conflicts around the world. The red poppy is the only acceptable color for the poppy, as anything else politicizes the poppy. Remembrance Day is non-political, and the intervention of other colors for political statements is not welcome. The poppy, as a symbol of remembrance, goes back even further than World War I. At the time of the Napoleonic Wars, the graves of soldiers who were buried in Flanders were observed to have these red poppies growing over them. Red is the only color that these poppies grow in. We will now recite the poem written by Colonel John McCrae during the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the gardens below. We are the dead short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from falling hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. We will now have a toast to the fallen. Masako, you're on. Ladies and gentlemen, to the Queen
Reiwa Emperor,
and to the fallen. Okay. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. That concludes today's ceremonies.